Thatcher Sullivan stared at the resignation email on his laptop screen at 11:47 p.m., cursor blinking over the send button like a metronome counting down to an ending. 52 years old, and he was about to quit a job as an executive assistant, a position he'd taken 3 years ago when no other company would hire a former VP of operations who'd been restructured out of existence at 47. The email was professional and brief, thanking Apex Industries for the opportunity, citing personal reasons effective in 2 weeks. All the corporate language that meant I can't do this anymore without saying why. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. One word from Sloan Whitfield appeared on the screen. "Help!" Thatcher's chest tightened. He knew exactly what that text meant because he'd received variations of it 17 times over the past 30 months. Sloan was trapped at another blind date her mother had orchestrated another evening, pretending interest in a man who looked perfect on society pages but made her feel like she was suffocating. The resignation email could wait. It had waited 3 years. It could wait one more night. He closed the draft without sending and pulled up his phone, already constructing the emergency that would save her one more time. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency across the screen, typing the kind of technical crisis that sounded credible to anyone who didn't know better. Server breach, client data compromised, federal investigation possible. Nuclear option, but necessary because this had to be the last time. After tonight, he'd resign and disappear, and maybe in a few months the ache in his chest when he thought about her would fade to something manageable. His phone rang 30 seconds after he sent the fabricated emergency. Sloan's voice came through, breathless with relief. "You're a lifesaver. I owe you everything. Just get out of there. I'll be at the office when you arrive." "Thatcher." She paused, and something in that pause made his heart stutter. "Thank you. For all of it. For 3 years of this." The call ended before he could respond. Thatcher sat alone in the empty building, surrounded by the hum of climate control and the faint glow of security lights from the street below. 3 years of working beside her, learning her coffee order by day 2 and her moods by week 1. 3 years of watching her build something extraordinary while fighting her mother's expectations. 3 years of falling in love so gradually he couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it had become impossible to imagine his life without her in it. But tonight would be different. Tonight he'd tell her the truth or he'd leave. Either way, the pretending would stop. The restaurant where Sloan had been suffering through dinner was one of those Back Bay establishments that charged $60 for a steak and made you feel inadequate regardless of your net worth. Lawrence Pemberton sat across from her, talking about his investment portfolio with the enthusiasm most people reserved for their children. Sloan had perfected the expression of polite attention, while her mind counted down minutes until she could reasonably excuse herself. When her phone buzzed with Thatcher's emergency text, the relief was so intense she almost laughed. Lawrence was mid-sentence about his summer house in the Hamptons when she interrupted with practiced regret. "I'm so sorry. There's a crisis at the office. I have to go immediately." Lawrence's jaw tightened. "Your mother mentioned you have a lot of these emergencies." The observation landed uncomfortably, but Sloan was already standing, already reaching for her coat. She'd deal with her mother's suspicions later. Right now, she needed to get to Apex Industries, where Thatcher would be waiting, where she could breathe again. The memory of their first rescue came to Sloan as she drove across Boston toward the office. October evening 2.5 years ago, 10 months after Thatcher had started as her executive assistant. She'd been dreading a blind date her mother had arranged, standing in her office at 8 p.m., wearing a dress she'd bought specifically to look appropriate for the kind of man Catherine Whitfield deemed suitable. Thatcher had been working late reviewing quarterly projections when she'd emerged and asked for a favor. His response had been immediate: anything. She'd explained about the date that started 30 minutes ago, about her mother's expectations, about not having a good excuse to skip it. And Thatcher had looked at her with those steady gray eyes and said, "Give me 5 minutes, then check your messages." He'd disappeared into the break room and called the office line, leaving a voicemail about server failures that sounded completely credible. Then he'd texted her phone with urgent professional language. When she'd called him back from the taxi, his voice had carried something she couldn't quite identify. Relief maybe, or satisfaction, or the beginning of something neither of them had been ready to name. That first rescue had established the pattern. Over the following 30 months, the fake emergencies had become routine, a secret language between them. Sloan would appear at his desk or text from restaurant bathrooms, and Thatcher would construct whatever crisis the situation required. Investor panic, system failures, board member complaints, PR disasters. He had a gift for making fiction sound like truth. But something else had developed in the spaces between those rescues. They'd started going to Eddie's Diner afterward, a 24-hour place in Southie with torn vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like burnt disappointment. It wasn't where Sloan Whitfield, CEO of a $2 billion company, typically spent her Saturday nights. It was exactly where she needed to be. One January night when sleet hammered the windows and the diner was nearly empty. Sloan had cupped her hands around her coffee and asked, "Tell me something true." Thatcher had looked up from his phone. Something true. "Everyone tells me what they think I want to hear. My mother tells me what I should want. These men tell me about themselves until I want to scream." She'd met his eyes across the table. "I want something real, even if it's small." There were so many truths Thatcher could have offered in that moment, that he thought about her constantly, that her laugh was the best sound he knew, that he'd been fired from his VP position because companies didn't value 50-year-old men the way they valued 30-year-old ones. That taking this assistant job had felt like accepting defeat until he'd met her, and suddenly, it felt like the only thing keeping him alive. Instead, he'd said, "I hate jazz. Everyone acts like that's a character flaw, but I've tried and it just sounds like musical arguments." Sloan had laughed her real laugh and said that was the most honest thing she'd heard in months. Then she'd shared her own truth about being afraid of becoming her mother, about building Apex to create something meaningful, but lately only seeing obligations when she looked at her calendar. Thatcher's response had been gentle. "You come here." She'd said, "I come here because you rescue me." And he'd corrected her. "I provide the excuse, you choose to leave. There's a difference." That conversation had shifted something between them, though neither acknowledged it directly. Over the months that followed, their talks at Eddie's grew longer and deeper, touching subjects that had nothing to do with work. They learned each other's histories. Thatcher told her about his wife Margaret, who died in a car accident 4 years ago, about their son Barrett studying at MIT. Sloan told him about her father's death 2 years past, about the pressure of being Catherine Whitfield's only child, about not wanting the life her mother had planned for her. By spring of the second year, the rescues had become so routine that other Apex employees noticed. The CFO, James Park, pulled Thatcher aside one afternoon and said, "She trusts you. That's rare. Don't take it lightly." The implication was clear. Some lines existed for good reasons, and Thatcher was walking too close to one that could destroy them both. He'd been careful after that conversation, never staying when other employees left, never suggesting plans outside their post-rescue routine, never letting his feelings show in his work. He was perfect and professional and slowly dying inside because being near her but not with her felt like torture disguised as blessing. Then came May evening 6 months ago that had almost changed everything. Sloan appeared at Thatcher's desk on a Saturday when he'd come in to catch up, assuming he'd be alone. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of corporate armor, her face carrying an expression he'd never seen before, raw and desperate and done with pretending. "I told her no." The words came out flat. Thatcher had stood from his chair. "Your mother. Frederick Hawthorne. Old money, old family." She actually used the word stabilize. Sloan's laugh held no humor. "I'm 38 years old and she thinks I need stabilizing." The anger in Thatcher's chest had risen hot and immediate. "You run a company worth $2 billion. She doesn't see that as real success." Sloan sat on the edge of his desk, looking suddenly exhausted. "To her, everything I've built is practice for my real role as someone's wife." They'd talked for an hour in the empty office about Catherine's expectations and Sloane's rebellion and the cost of constantly disappointing someone you loved. At some point, the conversation had shifted from professional sympathy to something more dangerous. They were standing too close. The building was too empty. The space between them felt charged with electricity neither could ignore. Sloane had said quietly, "What if I'm tired of being responsible?" Thatcher had responded, "Then feel whatever you're feeling, I'm here." And they'd been inches apart, about to cross a line 3 years in the making, when his phone rang. Catherine Whitfield's name on the screen. The interruption had been deliberate, her mother checking and controlling from a distance. Sloane had silenced Thatcher's phone, but hers had started buzzing immediately. They'd both known Catherine wouldn't stop calling until she got the response she wanted. Thatcher had created the biggest fake emergency of his career that night. Complete system failure, all servers down, federal investigation possible. It had bought Sloane freedom from dinner with Frederick Hawthorne, but it hadn't resolved the tension between them. They'd pulled back from the edge, returned to professional distance, and spent the next 6 months pretending that almost kiss hadn't happened. Now, as Sloane pulled into Apex's parking garage, she wondered if tonight would finally force the conversation they'd been avoiding. The emergency text had felt different somehow, more desperate, like Thatcher was reaching the end of something and needed her to know before it was too late. Thatcher was waiting in his office when Sloane arrived. He'd changed out of his usual suit into jeans and a button-down, looking younger and more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. His laptop sat open on the desk, showing an email draft that he quickly minimized when she walked in. "Thank you for the rescue." She set down her bag and studied his face. "What was that email?" "Nothing important." His deflection was obvious. "Thatcher." She moved closer. "What's going on? And don't say nothing, because you don't lie to me, except about fake emergencies." He stood and paced to the window overlooking Boston's financial district. The city glowed with Friday night energy, millions of people living their uncomplicated lives while Thatcher tried to figure out how to say what needed saying. Finally, he turned back to face her. "I was writing my resignation letter when you texted. I've been writing it for 3 hours. The words hit Sloane like a physical blow. "What? Why?" "Because I can't do this anymore." His voice was rough. "Because being your assistant while being in love with you is destroying me piece by piece, and I need it to stop." The confession hung in the air between them. Sloane's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her mind was racing, trying to process what he'd just said. In love with you. 3 years of working together, and she'd thought she was the only one carrying feelings that couldn't be spoken. "You..." She stopped, tried again. "How long?" "Month 3. The board meeting where you fought for expansion funding. Everyone said it was too risky, but you had this vision, and I watched you defend it with such passion, and I thought I could listen to you talk about your ideas for the rest of my life." "That was over 2 years ago." Sloane's voice came out strangled. "You've been hiding this for over 2 years. You're my boss. There's a power dynamic. It would have been inappropriate to..." Thatcher stopped when he saw her expression. "What? I've been in love with you since Dad's funeral. Since you sat with me at 3 in the morning in this office and didn't try to fix anything, just let me be sad." She crossed the room to stand directly in front of him. "That was 18 months ago. We've been doing this dance for 18 months. The mathematics of their mutual obliviousness would have been funny if it weren't so painful." Thatcher stared at her, trying to reconcile what she was saying with everything he'd believed about their relationship. "You never said anything. You never even hinted. Because you're my employee. Because I thought you just saw me as your boss who needed rescuing." Sloane's hands were shaking. "Because I was terrified of making you uncomfortable or abusing my position or ruining the one relationship in my life that felt real." They stood inches apart, breathing hard, 3 years of careful distance collapsing in seconds. Thatcher reached up and cupped her face with hands that trembled slightly. "We're idiots. Complete idiots," she agreed, and closed the remaining distance between them. The kiss was 3 years overdue, months of restraint finally breaking. Thatcher pulled her closer and Sloane made a sound against his mouth that was relief and want and coming home all at once. They kissed until breathing became necessary, until the reality of where they were and what this meant started filtering back through the haze of finally. When they pulled apart, Sloane was crying and laughing simultaneously. "What do we do now?" "I don't know." Thatcher rested his forehead against hers. "But I'm not resigning. Not anymore." "Good, because I'd just hire you back." She pulled back enough to look at him properly. "We'll figure this out. The power dynamic, the company policy, all of it. But together. Together." He tested the word like it was foreign and precious. "I like the sound of that." They sat on the couch in Sloane's office until past midnight, talking through logistics and fears and what happens next. HR would need to be informed. Thatcher would have to transfer to a different position, reporting to someone else. Sloane's mother would lose her mind. The board might have concerns, employees would gossip. None of it seemed insurmountable with both of them committed to making it work. Around 1 a.m., Sloane's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Lawrence called, "You embarrassed him. We need to talk about these emergencies." Sloane showed Thatcher the message. "She knows something's wrong with the pattern. Then maybe it's time to stop lying." His voice was steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We tell her the truth. We tell everyone the truth. No more fake emergencies, no more hiding. She'll make our lives hell. Probably." Thatcher pulled Sloane closer. "But I spent 3 years in hell pretending I didn't love you. Can't be worse than that." They drove separately back to their apartments that night with plans to meet Sunday and strategize how to handle the disclosure. Thatcher lay awake in his bed, unable to sleep, replaying the kiss and the conversation and the terrifying freedom of finally being honest. His phone buzzed around 2 a.m. with a text from Barrett. "Dad, you okay? You've been radio silent." Thatcher typed back, "More than okay. Tell you tomorrow." Sunday morning arrived with autumn rain and the knowledge that everything was about to change. Thatcher met Sloane at a coffee shop near her condo in Beacon Hill, somewhere they wouldn't run into Apex employees. She looked exhausted and beautiful, wearing jeans and an MIT sweatshirt that was probably her father's. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted after they'd ordered. "Kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. We could list them alphabetically if that helps." Thatcher's attempt at humor fell flat. "Sorry, I'm terrified too." "What scares you most?" The question was characteristically direct. Thatcher considered his answer carefully. "That 6 months from now you'll realize loving me isn't worth the professional cost. That the board or your mother or public opinion will make you regret choosing this. What scares me is losing you because other people can't handle us being together." Sloane wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I've spent my entire life making decisions based on what other people think is appropriate. I don't want to do that anymore." They spent the next 3 hours planning their approach. Monday, they'd inform HR together, disclose the relationship request restructuring to eliminate the reporting dynamic, commit to complete transparency going forward. They'd tell Catherine before she heard it from someone else. They'd be prepared for board scrutiny and employee gossip and the inevitable articles questioning Sloane's judgment. "It's going to be brutal," Thatcher said as they walked back to their cars. "Probably." Sloane took his hand, the gesture feeling simultaneously natural and revolutionary. "But we'll handle it together." Monday morning, Thatcher arrived at Apex at 7 a.m., with equal parts dread and determination. The resignation letter he'd almost sent Friday night was deleted permanently from his drafts. Whatever happened next, he wasn't running. He'd spent too many years being dismissed and diminished by corporate systems that valued youth over experience. He'd spent 3 years loving Sloane from a careful distance. He was done accepting less than what he deserved out of fear. Sloane was already in her office when he arrived, looking professional in navy blue with her hair pulled back severely, her armor for difficult conversations. She gestured him in and closed the door. "HR meeting is scheduled for 8. Jennifer Martinez, she's fair but thorough. Sloane's voice was steady. We tell her everything. The timeline, the fake emergencies, our plan going forward. What about the fake emergencies? Thatcher had been worrying about this all night. That's misuse of company resources, even if the intent was personal, not professional. We acknowledge it was wrong. We commit to complete transparency moving forward. We accept whatever consequences she deems appropriate. Sloane met his eyes. Honesty is our only play here. The meeting with Jennifer was exactly as uncomfortable as anticipated. She listened to their full disclosure with an expression that gave nothing away, taking notes on her tablet. When they finished, she was silent for a long moment before speaking. Let me make sure I understand. You've been creating false emergencies for approximately 30 months to help Ms. Whitfield avoid personal social obligations. During this time, you developed romantic feelings which remained unexpressed until this past Friday. You're now requesting restructuring to eliminate the reporting relationship so you can pursue this connection ethically. That's accurate. Sloane's voice didn't waver. The fake emergencies are concerning. They represent misuse of company systems and could be considered a violation of the trust inherent in your position. Jennifer looked at Thatcher. However, your work performance has been exemplary. You've never used your access inappropriately for professional gain, and Ms. Whitfield has never shown you favoritism in compensation or assignments. She pulled up something on her tablet. I'm recommending you transfer to special projects reporting to the COO. The role requires someone with operations expertise, which you have from your previous VP position. It's lateral compensation-wise, but removes any reporting relationship with Ms. Whitfield. Thatcher felt something unknot in his chest. That's acceptable. Ms. Whitfield, you'll need to recuse yourself from any decisions regarding Mr. Sullivan's performance reviews, compensation, or advancement. That's non-negotiable. Understood. Jennifer's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I appreciate your honesty in disclosing this. Many people wouldn't have. You're both adults capable of maintaining professional boundaries. As long as you continue to do so, I see no reason this relationship should impact your positions. They left HR feeling cautiously optimistic. The hard part was over, or so Thatcher thought. Then Sloane's assistant appeared, looking nervous. Ms. Whitfield, your mother is in the lobby. She says it's urgent. Sloane and Thatcher exchanged glances. Send her up. Conference room B. Catherine Whitfield entered the conference room like a storm given human form. Her cream suit was impeccable, but her face carried the kind of fury that came from having one's control challenged. She took in Thatcher's presence with a cold glance before focusing on her daughter. Lawrence Pemberton called me Friday night. Said you left dinner after 20 minutes claiming another emergency. Catherine's voice was arctic. That's the 17th time in 30 months, Sloane. I had someone check the company records. There have been no actual crises corresponding to your sudden departures. Because they weren't real emergencies. Sloane's voice was steady. They were excuses to leave dates I didn't want to be on. Excuses you had your assistant manufacture. Catherine's gaze cut to Thatcher. How much are you paying him to help you avoid adult responsibilities? Mother, Sloane's voice carried warning. Don't mother me. You've been lying for over 2 years, using company resources to avoid the very reasonable expectations I've tried to. Catherine stopped as Thatcher stood. His voice was quiet but firm. Ms. Whitfield asked me to help her escape uncomfortable situations. I did so because watching someone I care about suffer through dates she didn't want seemed like something worth preventing. Someone you care about. Catherine's laugh was sharp. How convenient. The 52-year-old assistant develops feelings for his wealthy boss. Very original. I'm not with Sloane for money or advancement. Thatcher felt anger rising but kept his voice level. I'm with her because she's the most remarkable person I've ever met, because she makes me want to be better than I am, because loving her has made me feel alive again after years of just existing. Pretty words. Did you rehearse them? Catherine, that's enough. Sloane stood, placing herself physically between her mother and Thatcher. Thatcher and I are in a relationship. We've disclosed it to HR. He's transferring positions to eliminate any power dynamic concerns. This is happening whether you approve or not. You're throwing away your reputation for a relationship that will never be accepted. He's too old, too low status, completely inappropriate. Get out! Sloane's voice cut through her mother's rant like a blade. Catherine blinked. Excuse me, get out of my office, out of my company. I'm done listening to your judgment about my life. I'm 38 years old and the CEO of a successful company, and I will choose my own partner without your input. Sloane, if you continue this relationship, you'll what? Disown me, pull your investment, tell your country club friends I'm a disappointment. Sloane's voice resumed. You've been doing that for years. I'm immune now, so either accept that I'm happy with Thatcher or accept that you won't be part of my life. Those are your options. Catherine looked between her daughter and Thatcher, calculation visible on her face. Finally, she picked up her bag and walked to the door. You'll regret this, both of you. After she left, Sloane collapsed into a chair and put her face in her hands. Thatcher sat beside her, wanting to offer comfort but uncertain what she needed. After a moment, she looked up with eyes that were dry but haunted. She's going to make this as difficult as possible. I know. The board might question my judgment. Investors might worry about stability. This could damage everything I've built. It could. Thatcher took her hand. But we'll handle it together. And if it helps at all, watching you stand up to her was one of the most attractive things I've ever seen. That pulled a surprised laugh from Sloane. You find confrontation with my mother attractive. I find you being authentically yourself attractive. He pulled her closer, even when yourself is terrifying. They sat together in the quiet conference room, both knowing the real fight was just beginning. Catherine Whitfield didn't accept defeat gracefully, and they'd just declared war on her expectations. But for the first time in 3 years, Thatcher felt like they were facing the future as partners instead of boss and assistant. Whatever came next, they'd handle it together. By Wednesday, the entire company knew about the relationship. HR had sent a professional announcement. Sloane Whitfield and Thatcher Sullivan have disclosed a personal relationship and restructured their professional reporting arrangement in accordance with company policy. The actual content was dry, but the gossip was immediate and intense. Thatcher moved into his new office in special projects and spent his first day fielding congratulations and speculation in equal measure. Some employees were supportive. Others clearly thought he was using Sloane for career advancement. The younger staff seemed more accepting than older executives who remembered when workplace relationships were automatically scandalous. James Park, the CFO, stopped by Thatcher's office late Wednesday afternoon. Heard the news, congratulations. Thank you. Also heard Catherine Whitfield is telling anyone who'll listen that you manipulated her daughter. James's voice was matter of fact. Preston Harrington on the board is friends with Catherine. He's already asking questions about company culture and leadership judgment. Thatcher felt his stomach sink. Preston Harrington was the board member who'd been pushing for leadership changes at Apex for the past year, arguing Sloane was too young and inexperienced despite her track record. A personal scandal would give him exactly the ammunition he needed. How worried should I be? Worried enough to document everything, every project, every decision, every meeting. James's gaze was serious. Preston will look for any excuse to claim you're getting favoritism or that your relationship is affecting company performance. Don't give him one. After James left, Thatcher sat in his new office staring at the Boston skyline and wondered if loving Sloane was going to cost her everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Barrett. Dad, can we talk? It's important. Thatcher called his son immediately. Barrett's voice came through tense. I saw the announcement. You and Ms. Whitfield are actually together. We are. And you didn't think to mention this before it went company-wide. It happened fast. Friday we admitted feelings, Monday we disclosed to HR. Thatcher heard the defensiveness in his own voice. I was going to call you this weekend. Dad. Barrett's voice softened. I'm not mad. I'm happy for you. I've been telling you for 2 years that you needed to move on from Mom." The mention of Margaret made Thatcher's throat tight. "This isn't about moving on from your mother. Isn't it, though? You've been grieving for 4 years, working a job below your capabilities because you stopped believing you deserved better. Then you meet someone who makes you want to live again, and you spend 3 years hiding it because you think you don't deserve happiness." Barrett paused. "Mom made you promise before she died that you'd really live, remember? Not just exist. Maybe this is you finally keeping that promise." The conversation from Margaret's hospital bed came back with devastating clarity. She'd been lucid near the end, knowing she had days, not weeks. She'd made Thatcher promise he'd find joy again, that he wouldn't let grief consume him, that he'd choose life even when living felt impossible. He'd agreed through tears, thinking she was asking the impossible. "Your mother would have liked Sloan." Thatcher's voice was rough. "She would have loved that you found someone worth fighting for." Barrett's certainty was absolute. "So fight Dad. Don't let board politics or Sloan's awful mother or public opinion make you give up on something real." After they hung up, Thatcher sat in the darkening office thinking about promises and second chances and whether 52 was too old to believe in happy endings. His phone lit up with a text from Sloan. "My place tonight, need to see you." He replied immediately. "On my way." Sloan's condo occupied the top floor of a converted brownstone in Beacon Hill, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Common. Thatcher had never been inside before, though he'd driven her home dozens of times after late work nights. The interior was exactly what he'd expected: minimalist furniture, abstract art, everything expensive and carefully chosen and somehow impersonal, like she'd hired a designer to create the idea of a home, without actually living in it. She was pacing when he arrived, still wearing her work clothes but barefoot, her hair down from its usual professional twist. A bottle of wine sat open on the counter with 2 glasses poured. She handed him one without asking if he wanted it. "Preston Harrington called an emergency board meeting for Friday morning. That's 3 days from now." Her voice was tight with controlled anger. "He's claiming the relationship represents a governance issue that requires immediate review." Thatcher set down the wine untouched. "What kind of review? The kind where they decide if my personal life makes me unfit to lead the company I built?" Sloan finally stopped pacing to look at him. "James gave me a heads up. Preston's been calling board members individually, framing this as a judgment problem. He's saying if I can't maintain appropriate boundaries with employees, how can they trust me with bigger decisions? We disclosed to HR. We restructured the reporting relationship. What more does he want? He wants me gone." The truth came out flat and certain. "Preston's been angling for leadership changes since last spring. He thinks the board should replace me with someone older, more experienced, preferably male. Our relationship is just the excuse he needed." Thatcher moved to where she stood and pulled her into his arms. She resisted for a moment, then collapsed against his chest, her control finally breaking. "I knew there would be consequences. I just didn't think they'd come this fast. We'll fight this." His voice was firm, even as fear clawed at his chest. "We'll show the board that our relationship doesn't compromise your leadership." "How? By pointing out that my boyfriend used to work for me, that we've been lying about emergencies for over 2 years, that my own mother thinks I'm making terrible decisions." She pulled back to look at him. "Preston has ammunition, Thatcher, real ammunition that we handed him. Then we tell the truth, all of it. The fake emergencies were wrong, but they weren't about professional gain. We developed feelings and handled them appropriately by disclosing and restructuring. Your personal life doesn't affect your professional performance. You think Preston cares about truth? He cares about winning." Sloan moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. "He's already contacted Catherine. James heard they had lunch yesterday. She's feeding him information about my personal life, probably painting you as some opportunist who seduced the lonely CEO." The image of Catherine and Preston coordinating their attack made Thatcher's blood run cold. "Your mother wouldn't actually sabotage your career, wouldn't she?" Sloan's laugh held no humor. She pulled her investment once when I refused to date someone she approved. That was 5% of my seed funding. She'll absolutely damage my reputation if she thinks it'll force me to leave you and choose someone suitable. Thatcher joined her at the window, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. Then we prepare for the board meeting. We document everything. We show them your leadership has been exceptional and our relationship hasn't changed that. And if they decide it's not enough, if Preston convinces them I'm compromised, then we deal with that together. He turned her to face him. But I won't let you lose everything you've built because of me. If it comes to it, I'll resign. I'll leave Boston, give them space to see you're the same brilliant CEO you've always been. That's not what I want. Her voice was fierce. I don't want you sacrificing yourself to save my career. I want us to fight for this together. Then that's what we'll do. They stayed up until past midnight planning their defense for the board meeting. Sloan compiled performance metrics showing Apex's growth trajectory had accelerated, not declined, since their relationship began. Thatcher documented his transfer to special projects and the elimination of any reporting relationship. They practiced responses to the questions Preston would likely raise about judgment and boundaries and professional ethics. Around 1 a.m., Barrett video called. His face on Sloan's laptop screen looked concerned and determined. Dad texted me about the board meeting. I'm coming home Friday to support you. You have classes. Thatcher's automatic protest was weak. I have a father who needs backup. Classes can wait. Barrett's gaze shifted to include Sloan in the frame. Ms. Whitfield, I've never seen Dad this happy. Not since Mom. If some board member thinks he can take that away, he's going to find out what happens when you mess with a Sullivan. The fierce loyalty in his son's voice made Thatcher's throat tight. After they ended the call, Sloan looked at him with something set in her expression. Your son is wonderful. He gets it from his mother. She was the strong one in our family. Tell me about her. Sloan settled onto the couch and pulled Thatcher down beside her. I know she died 4 years ago, but I don't know the story. So Thatcher told her. About Margaret, who'd been a nurse who'd married him when they were both 25 and poor. About building their life together while he climbed from operations manager to director to VP. About Barrett being born when they were 30, the joy of that. About Margaret's diagnosis when Barrett was 17, breast cancer that metastasized before they caught it. About 18 months of treatments that didn't work and hope that dwindled, and finally the hospice bed where she'd made him promise to really live. She died the week after Barrett's high school graduation. She held on long enough to see him graduate, then let go. Thatcher's voice was rough. For 2 years after I just existed, work took care of Barrett, went through motions. Then I got restructured out of my VP job and couldn't find another one because I was 47 and companies wanted younger blood. That's when you came to Apex. That's when I stopped trying for VP positions and started applying for anything that would pay Barrett's MIT tuition. Your posting for an executive assistant didn't require specific experience, just organizational skills and discretion. I was overqualified but desperate. He looked at her. I thought it would be temporary, a step down until I could rebuild my career. Then I met you, and suddenly the job didn't feel like a step down anymore. It felt like exactly where I needed to be. Sloan leaned her head against his shoulder. When did you know you loved me? The expansion board meeting. Month 3, like I said. Thatcher pulled her closer. You were so passionate about your vision. Everyone kept listing reasons it wouldn't work, and you systematically destroyed each argument with data and logic and this absolute certainty that you were right. I watched you fight for what you believed in and thought, I want to see you fight for things for the rest of my life. I was terrified during that meeting. The board wanted to play it safe, and I knew playing it safe would kill the company's growth. She smiled against his shoulder. After the meeting, I came to your desk and asked, did I just make the biggest mistake of my career? You said probably, but it's going to be brilliant. That's when I knew you were different from everyone else. Different how? Everyone else either told me I was definitely right to make me feel better or definitely wrong to protect themselves. You told me the truth, which was that I'd taken a risk and we'd find out together if it paid off. You weren't managing me or trying to fix me, you were just there. She lifted her head to look at him. That's when I started falling. I just didn't recognize it until much later. They fell asleep on the couch, wrapped around each other, too exhausted to move to the bedroom. Thatcher woke at dawn with a crick in his neck and Sloane's hair in his face and a bone-deep certainty that whatever happened Friday, he'd found something worth fighting for. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and dread. Thatcher threw himself into his new role in special projects, determined to prove his competence had nothing to do with proximity to Sloane. His first assignment was an efficiency audit of operations, exactly the kind of work he'd done as a VP. Within 48 hours, he'd identified cost-saving opportunities that made the COO's eyes light up. Meanwhile, Sloane dealt with board members calling to express concerns or ask questions, or in Preston's case, lay groundwork for her removal. She handled each conversation with professional grace, but Thatcher could see the strain building. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. Her usual sharp humor gave way to terse responses. By Thursday evening, she looked like someone barely holding on. "Come home with me tonight." Thatcher found her in her office after most employees had left. "Barrett's at my apartment cooking dinner. He wants to meet you properly, not as boss, but as the woman I love. I have to finish these projections for tomorrow. You have to eat and sleep and remember you're human." He moved closer. "Please, Sloane, you can't go into that board meeting running on fumes." She looked up from her laptop with eyes that were exhausted and grateful. "Okay, but I'm terrible at meeting parents or children or anyone whose opinion actually matters. Barrett already likes you. He's been planning this dinner for 2 days. Thatcher's apartment in the Sunset District was modest compared to Sloane's condo. Older building, smaller rooms, furniture accumulated over years, rather than chosen by designers. But when they walked in and Barrett looked up from the stove wearing an apron and grinning, Sloane's tension visibly decreased. "Ms. Whitfield, welcome. I made lasagna because Dad said you like Italian, and I only know how to cook 3 things, and the other 2 are scrambled eggs and grilled cheese." Barrett's nervous energy was endearing. "Also, I'm supposed to call you Sloane now, right? Not Ms. Whitfield. This is weird. You're my dad's girlfriend, but also technically my dad's former boss, so I don't know the protocol." Sloane laughed, the first real laugh Thatcher had heard from her in days. "Sloane is perfect, and lasagna is my favorite Italian food, so you chose well." Over dinner, Barrett asked Sloane about Apex's technology development, while managing to simultaneously make her feel welcome and respected and normal. He talked about his startup job and his girlfriend Clara and plans after graduation. He told stories about Thatcher that made her laugh, including one about his father trying to help with calculus homework and getting so confused they'd had to call Barrett's teacher. "Dad's brilliant at operations and strategy, but math above basic algebra makes his brain shut down." Barrett grinned at his father. "No offense. None taken. It's genetically accurate." Thatcher raised his wine glass in acknowledgement. After dinner, Sloane helped Barrett clean up while Thatcher took a work call. In the kitchen, Barrett said quietly, "He's different with you. Lighter. Different how? After Mom died, he became this really efficient, really competent robot. Went to work, paid bills, made sure I was okay, never talked about how he was feeling." Barrett stacked plates carefully. "Then about 2 years ago, he started coming home less miserable. I'd ask about his day, and he'd actually have stories. About you, usually. The CEO who stayed up all night fixing a problem that wasn't her fault so her team wouldn't get blamed. The woman who remembered every employee's birthday. He didn't say he was in love with you, but I knew. He's a good man. He's the best man." Barrett's voice was fierce with loyalty, "which is why if Preston Harrington tries to hurt either of you tomorrow, he's going to regret it. I'm sitting in that board meeting gallery with Dad's former colleagues from his VP days. We're going to make sure Preston knows exactly what kind of person he's attacking." The protection offered by this 22-year-old made Sloane's eyes sting. "Thank you. Family protects family. Your family now." When Thatcher came back from his call, he found Sloane and Barrett laughing over some story about MIT cafeteria food. The domestic normalcy of it made something settle in his chest that felt like hope. Later that night, after Barrett had gone to bed, Thatcher and Sloane sat on his small balcony overlooking a neighborhood that had nothing remarkable about it except that it was his. The October air carried the smell of fallen leaves and approaching winter. "I like your son." Sloane's voice was quiet. "I like your apartment. I like seeing this part of your life. It's not as impressive as your place. It's real. Your condo feels like you, not like some designer's idea of successful bachelor." She took his hand. "Tomorrow's going to be brutal. Probably. Preston's going to make us look reckless and inappropriate and compromised by personal feelings. Almost certainly. But we're going into it together." Her grip tightened. "No more hiding, no more pretending, just the truth." "The truth." Thatcher pulled her closer. "Which is that I love you, and our relationship makes me better at everything I do because I'm finally living instead of just existing." "That's good. Write that down for tomorrow." They stayed on the balcony until cold drove them inside. Sloane spent the night in Thatcher's bed, both of them sleeping fitfully, both dreading and ready for what Friday morning would bring. The boardroom felt like a courtroom when they entered at 8 a.m. All 7 board members sat in their assigned positions, with Preston Harrington looking confident and predatory at one end. Thatcher sat beside Sloane at the main table, officially present as Director of Special Projects, though everyone knew his real role was as her partner. Barrett sat in the gallery along with 3 people Thatcher recognized as former colleagues from his Meridian Tech days. Preston wasted no time launching his attack. "We're here because Ms. Whitfield's relationship with her former assistant raises serious questions about judgment and professional boundaries. Over 30 months, Mr. Sullivan created false company emergencies to facilitate Ms. Whitfield's personal life. This represents misuse of company resources and demonstrates poor decision-making." He pulled up a presentation showing dates and times of the fake emergencies' IT logs, proving they'd never been real, the pattern of weekend disruptions. Furthermore, this relationship developed while Mr. Sullivan was Ms. Whitfield's direct report, creating an inherent power imbalance. "We must ask, can we trust a CEO who allowed this situation to develop?" Margaret Fairchild, one of the older board members, spoke carefully. "These are serious concerns. The fake emergencies alone suggest questionable judgment." Another board member nodded agreement. Thatcher watched the room divide before his eyes. Preston had done his work well, planting doubts and highlighting every misstep. Sloane's response was measured and backed with data. "Let me address facts versus speculation. Yes, the fake emergencies were inappropriate. We've acknowledged that to HR and committed to complete transparency going forward. However, let's look at actual company performance." She pulled up metrics showing Apex's growth over the same 30-month period. Revenue up 43%, client retention at 98%, employee satisfaction scores climbing from 72 to 89%, 3 successful product launches. "If my judgment is compromised, explain these results. If this relationship damaged my leadership, show me where." Preston's counter was smooth. "Performance isn't the only measure of fitness. Perception matters. What do investors think when our CEO dates someone 14 years younger who used to work for her? What message does this send about professional standards? What message does it send when we hold female CEOs to different standards than male ones?" Sloane's voice hardened. "Would we be having this conversation if I were male and 52 dating a 38-year-old female assistant? Or would that be considered normal executive behavior?" The question landed in silence. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Preston's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly. "This isn't about gender. It's about the specific circumstances of this relationship and the pattern of deception it involved." Walter Graves spoke for the first time. Thatcher recognized him as the retired COO who'd been with Apex since its early days. "I have a question for Mr. Sullivan. The fake emergencies were your idea." "They were." Thatcher's voice was steady. "Ms. Whitfield's mother was arranging dates she didn't want to attend. I provided her with professional excuses to leave. It was wrong and I take full responsibility. And your relationship developed during this period? My feelings developed during this period. I didn't act on them or disclose them until recently because of the professional dynamic. Did Ms. Whitfield ever pressure you to create these emergencies or offer you professional benefits in exchange? Never. She asked for help as someone trapped in uncomfortable situations. I offered help as someone who cared about her well-being. There was never any quid pro quo. Walter nodded slowly. That's an important distinction. Preston jumped in. The distinction doesn't eliminate the impropriety. The fact remains that Mr. Sullivan used company systems inappropriately and Ms. Whitfield allowed it. I didn't allow it, I requested it. Sloane's voice cut through. The fault is mine more than Thatcher's. I was the CEO asking an employee for personal favors. If this board wants to hold someone accountable, hold me accountable. But don't pretend this is about company welfare when it's really about discomfort with my personal choices. The meeting continued for another hour with Preston pressing his case and Sloane defending hers. Board members asked questions ranging from supportive to hostile. Through it all, Thatcher sat quietly letting Sloane fight her own battle, but ready to support if needed. Finally, Walter called for a vote. I move that we table this discussion and reconvene in 90 days for a full performance review. This gives Ms. Whitfield time to demonstrate that her personal life doesn't compromise her professional capabilities. Margaret seconded the motion. The vote was 4 in favor, 3 opposed. Preston had wanted immediate action but settled for the review period with visible frustration. 90 days. He looked at Sloane and Thatcher. We'll be watching closely. Any hint that this relationship is affecting company performance, and we reconvene immediately. After the board members filtered out, Sloane slumped in her chair with exhaustion written across her face. Thatcher moved to sit beside her, wanting to offer comfort but uncertain what she needed. 90 days. Her voice was flat. 90 days of proving we're professional enough, appropriate enough, good enough to exist. We'll prove it. Thatcher took her hand. We'll show them this relationship makes us stronger, not weaker. And if we can't, then we face that together. Barrett appeared in the doorway with the 3 former Meridian colleagues. Preston Harrington just got into the elevator. Want to know what he said to his phone call? You followed him. Thatcher was alarmed. I observed from a respectful distance. He told whoever was on the phone that the 90-day review is just a formality, that he has the votes to remove Sloane once enough evidence accumulates. Barrett's expression was grim. He's not trying to assess fitness. He's building a case for removal. The revelation settled over the room like cold water. Sloane stood and walked to the window overlooking Boston's financial district. Then we give him nothing. For 90 days, we're the most professional, most exemplary, most unassailable couple in corporate America. That's one strategy. Walter's voice came from the doorway. They'd all assumed he'd left with the other board members. Or you could consider a different approach. He entered the conference room and closed the door. I was on Meridian Tech's board when they restructured Thatcher out. I voted against it. Age discrimination, pure and simple. He looked at Thatcher directly. You were making too much and they wanted cheaper labor. It was wrong then and it's relevant now. How is it relevant? Thatcher was confused. Because Preston's entire case rests on questioning your integrity and Sloane's judgment. But I know your history. I know you were a VP earning $200,000 a year before ageism destroyed your career. I know you took this assistant job because you needed money for your son's education, not because you were aiming to seduce a wealthy CEO. Walter's voice was firm. That narrative matters. It undercuts Preston's implication that you're an opportunist. You want me to publicly admit I was fired for being too old. The humiliation of that felt overwhelming. I want you to tell the truth. Not fired, restructured, but yes, discriminated against because companies value youth over experience. Walter's gaze was steady. I also want you to know I'm in your corner. Preston has 3 votes locked. Sloane has 3 votes. Margaret and I are the swing votes. I'm voting for Sloane. You just need to win Margaret. After Walter left, the five of them stood in the conference room processing the information. Barrett spoke first. This is good, right? Walter's on your side. Walter's on the side of truth and competence. Sloane's voice was careful. Which means we need to be absolutely perfect for 90 days. No mistakes, no appearances of impropriety, nothing Preston can twist. One of Thatcher's former colleagues cleared his throat. For what it's worth, we're here if you need testimony about Thatcher's capabilities. Everyone at Meridian knew he got screwed. We'd be happy to provide evidence of his competence and character. The support from people he hadn't spoken to in years made Thatcher's throat tight. After they left, he and Sloane and Barrett sat in the empty conference room trying to figure out next steps. I need to work. Sloane stood with determined purpose. I need to compile 90 days of flawless performance metrics. Preston wants evidence. I'm compromised. I'll give him evidence. I'm the best CEO this company has ever had. And I need to make special projects so successful they can't argue I'm deadweight being carried by my relationship. Thatcher felt resolve settling into his bones. We go to war. Professionally, ethically, by the book, but we go to war. Barrett grinned. That's the dad I know. The one who doesn't quit when things get hard. Over the following week, Sloane and Thatcher threw themselves into work with focused intensity. Sloane drove the team to complete a product launch 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Thatcher's efficiency audit identified $12 million in potential cost savings. They were meticulous about maintaining professional boundaries at the office. Never meeting alone in her office, always leaving in separate cars, giving no ammunition to anyone watching for signs of impropriety. But the strain of constant performance began showing. Sloane started working 18-hour days, sleeping in her office more often than her condo. Thatcher found himself second-guessing every decision, wondering if Preston would somehow frame it as favoritism. They barely saw each other outside work, both too exhausted to do more than collapse into bed when they finally made it home. 2 weeks into the 90-day period, Catherine made her move. An article appeared in Boston Business Journal with the headline, Apex Industries CEO's controversial relationship raises leadership questions. The piece quoted anonymous sources claiming the relationship had damaged company culture and citing the fake emergencies as evidence of poor judgment. But the most damaging part was Catherine's interview. She was quoted extensively expressing maternal concern about Sloane's choices, questioning whether Thatcher was appropriate for her daughter, suggesting the age gap indicated deeper issues. I worry my daughter is making decisions based on loneliness rather than logic. Mr. Sullivan seems pleasant, but he's not what she needs. Thatcher read the article in his office and felt something break inside him. The public humiliation was methodical and devastating. By afternoon, the story had been picked up by tech blogs and industry publications. His phone filled with messages from former colleagues offering sympathy or asking for comment. The only message he answered came from Walter. This changes nothing. Stay focused on performance. That evening, Sloane appeared at Thatcher's apartment door looking hollowed out. She held a copy of the Boston Business Journal in one hand and fury in her eyes. She went to the press. My own mother weaponized our relationship in print. Thatcher pulled her inside and held her while she shook with anger and hurt. Preston coordinated this. The timing is too perfect. Of course he did. He's been feeding her questions, probably promised her I'd leave you if enough pressure built. Sloane pulled back to look at him. She actually said, you're not what I need, like she has any idea what I need. Maybe we should respond, issue our own statement, and say what my mother's bitter manipulation doesn't reflect reality. That'll just create more headlines. Sloane collapsed onto his couch. We stay quiet and professional and let our work speak for itself. For how much longer? The question came out more frustrated than intended. We've been living like monks, working until we collapse, giving up everything normal about a relationship just to prove we can be professional. How long before we get to actually be together instead of performing distance? Sloane looked at him with exhaustion written across her face. 76 more days, then the board votes, and either we win or we don't. And if we don't, if Preston convinces them to remove you despite perfect performance, then I lose the company I built and you lose the career you just started rebuilding. Her voice went hollow. And we have to decide if loving each other was worth destroying everything else. The possibility hung between them like smoke. Thatcher wanted to say, of course it's worth it. Of course love matters more than careers, but he'd been fired before. He knew what losing professional identity did to a person's sense of self. And watching Sloane lose Apex would destroy something fundamental in her. We're not going to lose. He said it with more confidence than he felt to see. We're going to be so good at our jobs that Preston has no case. You say that like competence matters. This isn't about competence. It's about comfort. Preston and the board members he's swayed don't care that I'm a good CEO. They care that I'm an uncomfortable CEO who makes choices they don't approve of. Sloane's voice cracked. I thought building something valuable would be enough. I thought results would speak for themselves. But it turns out being excellent doesn't matter if you're also inconvenient. Thatcher didn't have an answer for that because she was right. Excellence wasn't enough when people were determined to find you lacking. He'd learned that lesson at 47 when age became more important than capability. Sloane was learning it now at 38 when choosing her own partner became evidence of poor judgment. They spent the night tangled together on his couch, both too exhausted to move to the bedroom, both wondering if the relationship they'd fought to protect would survive the battle to legitimize it. The weeks crawled by with grinding slowness. Thatcher's projects and special projects kept succeeding, each one adding to his credibility. Sloane's leadership continued producing exceptional results. But Preston was relentless, calling board members with concerns, planting doubts, building his case brick by brick. 6 weeks into the review period, Walter requested a private meeting with Thatcher. They met at a coffee shop in Cambridge, far enough from Apex that they wouldn't run into colleagues. Walter got straight to the point. Preston's been investigating your background. He hired a private investigator to dig into your Meridian Tech departure. Thatcher's stomach dropped. There's nothing to find. I was restructured, received severance, left on good terms. That's what I told him, but he's not looking for truth, he's looking for ammunition. Walter's expression was grim. I wanted you to know so you're not blindsided if he produces something at the final review. What could he possibly produce? I have documentation of everything. People determined to win find ways to twist facts. Just be prepared. Walter stood to leave, then paused. Also, I like what you're doing in special projects. The efficiency audit was brilliant work. Keep that up and you'll make Margaret's decision very easy. After Walter left, Thatcher sat alone with his coffee and growing dread. He'd kept copies of his severance package somewhere, though he'd moved twice since leaving Meridian, and wasn't certain where those documents ended up. He spent that evening and the next digging through storage boxes in his apartment building's basement, searching for proof that Preston couldn't twist into something damaging. Barrett came home for the weekend and helped with the search. What exactly are we looking for? My Meridian Tech severance agreement. Proof I was restructured, not fired for cause. Thatcher opened another box of papers. Preston's investigating my background and I need documentation to counter whatever he manufactures. Dad, you kept everything after Mom died. If you had that agreement, it's somewhere. Barrett's confidence was reassuring. We'll find it. But after 2 days of searching, the document remained elusive. Thatcher started to panic that he'd thrown it out during one of his moves, that the proof of his professional integrity was gone forever. By Sunday evening, he was ready to give up when Barrett opened a box marked Margaret's papers and found a manila folder labeled Important Documents. Inside was Thatcher's severance agreement from Meridian Tech. 6 months salary, continuation of benefits, strong letter of recommendation. All proof that he'd been restructured as part of cost-cutting measures, not terminated for performance issues. See, Mom would never let you throw out important papers. Barrett's voice held affection for his mother's organizational skills. She probably filed this away and you forgot. Thatcher held the documents with hands that shook slightly. I need to scan these and store them digitally. Multiple locations. Already on it. Barrett pulled out his phone. I'll email them to you, Sloan, Walter, and myself, just in case Preston tries something. Monday morning, Thatcher arrived at Apex with renewed purpose. He had documentation. He had excellent work performance. He had Walter's support. Preston's investigation would find nothing damaging because there was nothing damaging to find. But that afternoon, his confidence evaporated when Sloan appeared at his office looking shaken. She closed the door and leaned against it, her face pale. Preston called another emergency board meeting, Thursday. He says he has evidence of misconduct that requires immediate discussion. Her voice was carefully controlled. He wouldn't tell me what evidence, just said it's serious enough to warrant revisiting the 90-day timeline. What kind of evidence could he possibly have? I don't know, but whatever it is, he sounds confident it'll end this. Sloan moved to sit across from Thatcher's desk. We need to be ready for anything. They spent the next 3 days preparing for every possibility, compiling documentation, rehearsing responses, building defense strategies. Walter gave them a heads up that Preston was claiming to have proof Thatcher had lied on his Apex employment application. The accusation made no sense since Thatcher had been scrupulously honest about his background. Thursday morning arrived with cold November rain and a sense of impending disaster. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Thatcher and Sloan arrived early to review their materials one final time. Barrett sat in the gallery again, this time with 5 former Meridian colleagues who'd come to provide testimony if needed. Preston entered looking satisfied in a way that made Thatcher's instincts scream danger. The meeting started with Preston's presentation, and within minutes Thatcher understood why he looked so confident. I've obtained Mr. Sullivan's personnel file from Meridian Tech. According to their records, he was terminated for cause, performance issues, and insubordination. Preston displayed what appeared to be official documentation. He lied on his Apex application, which listed his departure as voluntary restructuring. The accusation detonated in the quiet boardroom. Thatcher felt the floor drop from under him. He pulled up the severance agreement he'd scanned and prepared to display it when he noticed something. Preston's version of the personnel file looked different from what Thatcher remembered. The language had changed. Details were altered. That document is fake. Thatcher's voice cut through the murmurs. I was restructured, not terminated for cause. I have the original severance agreement proving it. He displayed his documentation on screen. 6 months severance benefits continuation letter of recommendation. All proof that contradicted Preston's claims. But Preston was ready with a counter. Mr. Sullivan could have fabricated those documents. The official Meridian records show termination for cause. Then someone altered the official records. Walter's voice came quiet but firm. Because I was on Meridian's board when Thatcher was restructured. I voted against it. I know for a fact he received severance, which doesn't happen with for-cause termination. Preston's confidence flickered. Your memory of events 5 years ago may be. My memory is perfect, and I have meeting minutes from the board session where we discussed his restructuring. Walter pulled up his own documentation. I keep records of every board vote I participate in. Here's proof we restructured Thatcher as part of cost-cutting, not for performance issues. The room went silent. Preston stared at Walter's evidence calculation visible on his face. Then Meridian's records must have been updated to reflect lies you paid someone to insert. Walter's voice hardened. I made some calls after you started this investigation, Preston. Interesting what one discovers when one asks the right questions. Would you like to explain how much you paid that private investigator to alter Meridian's digital files? The accusation hung in the air like a bomb. Every board member turned to stare at Preston, who'd gone pale. Margaret Fairchild's voice was sharp with anger. Preston, did you falsify evidence? I was trying to uncover the truth about Sullivan's background. If methods were unconventional, methods were criminal. Walter interrupted. Falsifying corporate records is fraud. You've broken multiple laws trying to remove Sloan and frame Thatcher as dishonest. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Board members demanding explanations, Preston trying to justify his actions, Sloane sitting very still with shock written across her face. Through it all, Thatcher felt numb, the whiplash from being accused to being vindicated happening too fast to process. Finally, Walter called for order and a vote: immediate removal of Preston Harrington from the board for ethics violations. The vote was 6 in favor, 0 opposed, 1 abstaining, since Preston couldn't vote on his own removal. Security escorted Preston from the building within the hour. The board reconvened briefly to discuss next steps, ultimately deciding to complete the original 90-day review as planned, but with Preston's accusations formally noted as fraudulent and his manipulation exposed. After everyone left, Sloane and Thatcher sat in the empty boardroom processing what had happened. Barrett appeared with his former Meridian colleagues, all of them looking relieved and satisfied. "That was better than I expected." Barrett's grin was fierce. "Preston tried to destroy you and destroyed himself instead." "Walter destroyed him." Thatcher's voice was shaky. "If he hadn't kept those board meeting records, if you hadn't been telling the truth, records wouldn't have mattered." One of the Meridian colleagues stepped forward. "We've been waiting for someone to expose Preston Harrington. He's pulled this kind of political maneuvering before. Good to see him finally face consequences." After they left, Sloane turned to Thatcher with an expression he couldn't read. 38 more days, then the final review, but with Preston gone, we actually have a chance. We had a chance before. Thatcher pulled her close, finally letting himself feel the fear he'd been suppressing. But yes, a much better chance now. They stood together in the boardroom where they'd almost lost everything, both knowing the fight wasn't over but feeling like maybe possibly they might actually win. The 38 days following Preston's removal felt like walking a tightrope stretched across a canyon. Thatcher and Sloane knew they'd dodged one attack, but the final board review loomed like a storm on the horizon. They worked with focused intensity, building an unassailable case that their relationship enhanced rather than compromised their professional capabilities. Thatcher's efficiency audit concluded with recommendations that would save Apex $14 million annually. The COO presented his findings to the board with explicit praise for the depth of analysis and strategic thinking involved. Sloane drove 3 major client acquisitions and launched a product line that exceeded first-month sales projections by 40%. Every metric pointed toward exceptional leadership. But excellence on paper didn't eliminate the whisper campaigns or the articles that kept appearing in business publications questioning whether Apex's success was sustainable under current leadership. Catherine's media offensive had planted seeds of doubt that kept growing even after Preston's fraud was exposed. Anonymous sources continued citing concerns about judgment and professionalism, all carefully worded to avoid direct liability but devastating in their cumulative impact. 2 weeks before the final review, Walter requested another private meeting. They met at the same Cambridge coffee shop, Walter arriving with a folder that he set on the table between them with deliberate weight. "Catherine Whitfield has been feeding information to business journalists. I have proof of her coordination with 3 separate publications." Walter opened the folder showing email chains and phone records. "She's trying to accomplish through media pressure what Preston failed to achieve through board manipulation." Thatcher stared at the evidence, feeling sick. "Does Sloane know?" "Not yet. I wanted to give you the option of how to handle it." Walter's voice was measured. "Catherine is Sloane's mother. Exposing her publicly would damage that relationship permanently, but letting her continue could damage Sloane's career permanently. You need to decide which matters more." "Sloane needs to know. She deserves to make her own choice about how to respond." "That's what I thought you'd say." Walter closed the folder and pushed it across the table. "For what it's worth, you're good for her. I've watched Sloane build Apex for 8 years. She's always been brilliant, but she's never been happy. Until you." The observation settled into Thatcher's chest with uncomfortable weight. He'd been so focused on not destroying Sloane's career that he'd lost sight of whether their relationship actually made her life better. Working 18-hour days and sleeping in her office wasn't happiness. Fighting her mother and facing board scrutiny wasn't joy. Maybe loving him was costing her more than either of them wanted to admit. That evening, Thatcher found Sloane in her Apex office at 8 p.m., surrounded by quarterly projections and cold coffee. She looked up when he entered, her face carrying exhaustion that had become permanent over the past weeks. "We need to talk." He set Walter's folder on her desk. 20 minutes later, Sloane had read through all the evidence of her mother's media campaign. Her face had gone through shock to fury to something that looked like resignation. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow. "She's trying to destroy my career because I won't leave you. We could give her what she wants. I could resign, move to another city, give you space to rebuild without me as ammunition." The offer tasted like acid, but Thatcher forced it out. "Your relationship with your mother, your company, your reputation, those existed before me. I won't be the reason you lose them." "Stop!" Sloane's voice was sharp. "Stop offering to sacrifice yourself like that's the only solution. I don't want you to leave. I want my mother to stop trying to control my life." "Then we have to confront her together, show her this evidence, and make it clear that if she continues, we'll expose her publicly." Thatcher moved around the desk to sit beside her. "But that means potentially losing your mother permanently. Are you ready for that?" Sloane looked at the evidence spread across her desk, and something in her expression cracked. "I don't know. She's my only parent. Dad died 2 years ago, and she's all I have left of that connection. But she's also destroying everything I've built because she can't accept that I chose my own path. Then maybe it's time she faces consequences for that choice." Thatcher took her hand. "We call her. We show her the evidence. We give her one chance to stop. If she refuses, we go public with everything." They made the call from Sloane's office, putting Catherine on speaker. She answered on the second ring, her voice carrying false warmth. "Sloane, darling, what a surprise." "We know about the journalists." Sloane's voice was steady. "We have evidence of your coordination with business publications to damage my reputation." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Thatcher thought she might have hung up. Finally, Catherine spoke, her tone defensive. "I'm trying to protect you from making a terrible mistake. By destroying my career, by feeding lies to reporters, by coordinating with Preston Harrington, who committed fraud trying to remove me." Sloane's control was slipping. "That's not protection, Mother. That's sabotage. You're too close to the situation to see clearly. This man is wrong for you. The age difference, the power dynamic, the professional implications, all of it points toward disaster. All of it points toward you being unable to accept my choices." Sloane's voice hardened. "Here's what's going to happen. You stop talking to journalists. You stop trying to undermine my relationship. You stay out of my professional life entirely. If you don't, I'll release evidence of your coordination to every publication you've been feeding information to. Your reputation will be destroyed as thoroughly as you've tried to destroy mine. You wouldn't do that. I'm your mother. You're the woman who spent 2 years trying to control who I love. Try me." Sloane ended the call without waiting for a response. Her hands were shaking as she set down the phone. Thatcher pulled her into his arms and felt her shake with something between fury and grief. "I just threatened to publicly humiliate my own mother." "You set a boundary. There's a difference." His voice was gentle. "She'll either respect it or she won't. But either way, you've stopped letting her fear dictate your choices." They stayed in her office until past midnight, both processing the confrontation and what it meant. Sloane had chosen Thatcher over her mother's approval. The weight of that choice hung heavy between them, impossible to celebrate when it came at such cost. The final 2 weeks before the board review passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Sloane compiled comprehensive documentation of every decision, every project, every success from the 90-day period. Thatcher prepared presentations showing his contributions to special projects with concrete metrics attached. They rehearsed responses to every question the board might raise, determined to walk into that room unshakable. Barrett came home the night before the final review, bringing his girlfriend Clara, who wanted to meet the couple that had dominated his conversations for months. They all had dinner at a restaurant near Apex, somewhere neutral and normal where Thatcher and Sloan could pretend they weren't facing a career-defining morning. "You're both going to be fine tomorrow." Barrett's confidence was absolute. "Preston's gone, you have proof of excellence, and Walter's in your corner. The math is simple. The math is 3 guaranteed votes for us, 3 potentially against, and Margaret Fairchild as the swing vote." Sloane's voice was tight. "That's not simple, that's terrifying." Clara spoke up for the first time, her voice carrying quiet certainty. "Barrett talks about you both constantly. About how his dad came back to life after years of just surviving. About how you built a company while fighting everyone's expectations. People who do that don't lose board votes. They win." The faith from someone who barely knew them made Sloane's eyes sting. After dinner, Barrett and Clara headed back to Barrett's apartment while Thatcher and Sloane walked along the Charles River despite November cold. They ended up at a bench overlooking the water, the city glowing behind them. "What if we lose tomorrow?" Sloane's voice was small. "Then we figure out what comes next, together." Thatcher pulled her closer against the cold. "But we're not going to lose. We've done everything right. We've been excellent and transparent and uncompromising in our integrity. That has to count for something." In a fair world it would, but corporate boards aren't always fair. "No, but Walter is fair, and Margaret voted to give us 90 days to prove ourselves. We've proven ourselves." He turned her to face him. "Tomorrow we walk into that boardroom and we show them that courage matters more than comfort. That authentic leadership creates better outcomes, that choosing love doesn't make you weak, it makes you brave." "That's good. Are you planning to say that tomorrow?" "If it comes to it." Thatcher kissed her forehead. "But mostly I'm planning to let our work speak for itself." They went back to Sloane's condo and spent the night tangled together, both sleeping fitfully, both dreading and ready for morning. The boardroom on December 15th looked exactly the same as it had 90 days earlier. Except Preston's chair sat conspicuously empty. 6 board members assembled around the table with Margaret Fairchild and Walter Graves sitting side by side as the 2 swing votes everyone knew would determine the outcome. Sloane and Thatcher took their positions at the main table, both wearing professional armor, both carrying documentation that represented 3 months of their lives. Walter opened the meeting with characteristic directness. "We're here to complete the 90-day review of Ms. Whitfield's leadership in light of her relationship with Mr. Sullivan. Let's begin with performance metrics." Sloane presented first, her voice steady as she walked through company performance. Revenue growth of 32% over the review period, highest quarterly increase in Apex's history. Client retention at 99%. Employee satisfaction scores that had climbed to 91%, the highest on record. 3 successful product launches, 2 major client acquisitions, and market position that had strengthened considerably. If this board's concern was that my personal life would compromise my professional judgment, the data says otherwise. Apex has never been stronger. Margaret's question was measured. "The metrics are impressive, but what about company culture? Have there been any complaints about favoritism or inappropriate conduct?" "None that HR could substantiate. We've been completely transparent about our relationship. Mr. Sullivan reports to the COO, not to me. I've recused myself from any decisions affecting his compensation or advancement. We've maintained strict professional boundaries at work." Margaret turned to Thatcher. "Mr. Sullivan, you've been in special projects for 3 months. Tell us about your contributions." Thatcher pulled up his presentation showing the efficiency audit results. 14 million in annual cost savings identified across 3 departments. Workflow improvements that increased productivity by 18%. New vendor relationships that reduced supply chain costs. Each project was documented with concrete metrics and independent verification from the COO. I was hired into special projects based on my operational expertise from 15 years as a VP. The work I've done has nothing to do with my relationship with Ms. Whitfield and everything to do with experience and capability. One of the board members, who'd been quietly skeptical throughout, spoke up. "The performance is undeniable, but I still have concerns about perception. What message does this relationship send to other employees? That personal connections matter more than professional boundaries. What message does it send if we punish two people for being transparent and ethical? Walter's voice cut through. They disclosed the relationship immediately. They restructured to eliminate power dynamics. They've been exemplary in their conduct. If we still find that unacceptable, we're saying that having a personal life is incompatible with professional success. Another board member nodded agreement. I initially had reservations, but the evidence speaks for itself. Ms. Whitfield's leadership has been exceptional, and Mr. Sullivan has proven his value independent of his relationship. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. I appreciate the thoroughness of the documentation, but I want to address something that hasn't been discussed directly. Ms. Whitfield, Mr. Sullivan. What happens if this relationship ends? What happens if 6 months or a year from now, you break up and we're dealing with the fallout of former partners trying to work together? The question hung in the air. Sloan and Thatcher exchanged glances before Sloan answered. Then we handle it professionally the same way any other employees would handle a relationship ending. But that concern exists with any workplace relationship. We can't prove a negative or guarantee the future. All we can do is demonstrate that right now, at this moment, our relationship makes us better professionals, not worse ones. Thatcher added. And if I may asking, what happens if we break up assumes that's inevitable. We're not teenagers having a fling. We're adults who've built something real over 3 years. I love Sloan. I plan to spend my life with her. That commitment doesn't make professional complications more likely. It makes them less likely because we're both invested in making this work. Margaret's expression softened slightly. That's honest. I appreciate that. She looked around the table. I think we're ready to vote. Walter called for the question. All in favor of affirming Ms. Whitfield's continued leadership and closing this review with no further action required. The vote was 5 in favor, 1 opposed. Margaret had voted yes. The relief was so intense, Thatcher felt dizzy. Sloane's hand found his under the table and squeezed hard enough to hurt. The board member who'd voted against spoke up. For the record, my opposition isn't about Ms. Whitfield's capability. It's about maintaining standards for executive conduct, but I'm clearly in the minority. After the formal meeting adjourned, Margaret approached them both. I voted yes because the evidence supports it, but I also voted yes because watching you two fight for this reminded me that authentic leadership sometimes means making choices that make others uncomfortable. You've earned this outcome. Walter waited until most board members had left before speaking. There's one more thing. Catherine Whitfield contacted me last week. Sloan went very still. What did she want? To apologize. To me, not to you, which I told her was inappropriate. Walter's voice was kind. She said she'd been wrong about Mr. Sullivan and about trying to control your choices. She asked if there was any way to repair the damage she'd caused. What did you tell her? Sloan's voice was carefully neutral. I told her that wasn't my place to mediate. That she needed to talk to you directly and accept whatever response you gave. Walter paused. She's in the building, in the lobby. She asked if she could speak with you after the meeting. The revelation landed like a stone in still water. Thatcher watched Sloan process this information, saw her cycle through anger and hope and exhaustion. Finally, she nodded. Tell her to come up. Conference room B. After Walter left, Thatcher took Sloane's hands. I can stay or go. Whatever you need. Stay. She wanted to destroy us as a couple. She can face us as a couple. Catherine entered the conference room 5 minutes later, looking diminished in ways that went beyond physical appearance. Her usual imperious bearing had given way to something that looked like genuine humility. She stopped just inside the door, taking in both of them sitting side by side. Thank you for seeing me. Her voice was quiet. I wasn't sure you would. We almost didn't. Sloane's tone was guarded. You tried to destroy my career, Mother. You coordinated with Preston Harrington and fed lies to journalists and did everything possible to make me choose between you and Thatcher. I know. I was wrong. Catherine moved to sit across from them, her movements careful like she was approaching something dangerous. I've spent the past 2 weeks in therapy talking about control and fear and why I couldn't accept your choices. And what did you discover? Sloane's voice carried skepticism. That I was trying to save you from my mistakes while creating entirely new ones. Catherine's hands twisted in her lap. When I was 22, I was in love with someone. James Brennan. He was 15 years older, worked for my father's firm, completely unsuitable according to my family. They forbade the relationship, and I listened because I thought doing the right thing meant following their rules. She looked up with eyes that held 40 years of regret. I married your father 6 months later. He was suitable and appropriate in everything my family wanted, and I never loved him the way I loved James. I spent 40 years wondering what if feeling empty even when everything looked perfect from outside. Why are you telling me this? Sloane's voice had lost some of its hardness. Because when you started dating Thatcher, older man, not from our circles, choosing love over suitability, I saw myself at your age. I thought I was saving you from my regrets, but I was forcing my regrets onto you. Catherine's voice cracked. I don't want you to be 65 looking back at a life spent doing what others expected instead of what made you happy. Thatcher spoke for the first time. Mrs. Whitfield, I appreciate the apology, but words are easy. You coordinated with someone who committed fraud. You damaged Sloane's reputation with malicious intent. How do we trust that you've actually changed? You don't, not immediately. Catherine pulled an envelope from her bag. This is a formal written apology that I'm sending to every journalist I spoke with, retracting everything I said and admitting I was wrong. It'll damage my social standing considerably, but that's appropriate given what I've done. She set the envelope on the table. I also reinstated my investment in Apex at double the original percentage. That's 6% of company shares as both a financial commitment and a public statement that I support Sloane's leadership. Sloane picked up the envelope and read through the letter. Her expression was difficult to read. Finally, she looked at her mother. This will humiliate you with your country club friends. Good, I deserve humiliation for what I've put you through. Catherine's voice was firm. I'm also scheduling regular therapy appointments. I need help dealing with control issues and unresolved grief about your father. This doesn't fix everything immediately. Sloane's voice was careful. You hurt me deeply. You tried to destroy my relationship and my career. I can't just forgive that because you're apologizing now. I know. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild trust over time. Catherine looked at Thatcher. And I'm asking you to give me the opportunity to know you properly. Not as the unsuitable man dating my daughter, but as the person who makes her happy. Thatcher felt Sloane's hand tighten on his. He looked at her, saw the question in her eyes, and nodded slightly. The choice was hers. You can have a chance. Sloane's voice was steady. But on my terms. You accept my relationship with Thatcher completely. You stop trying to set me up with other people. You stop commenting on my personal choices. If you backslide even once you're out of my life permanently. Your terms, I accept them. Catherine stood, seeming to understand the conversation was ending. Thank you for seeing me, for giving me this opportunity. After she left, Sloane slumped in her chair and covered her face. Thatcher waited, letting her process. When she finally looked up, her expression held exhaustion and something that might have been relief. Did that just happen? Did my mother actually apologize and commit to therapy? She did. It doesn't erase what she's done. No, but it's a start. Thatcher pulled Sloane closer. And you don't have to forgive her quickly or easily. She earned every bit of your anger. I don't know how to do this. How to rebuild a relationship with someone who tried to destroy my life. Carefully, one conversation at a time, with boundaries firmly in place. He kissed her forehead. But you don't have to figure it out today. Today we just won the board vote. That's enough for now. They sat together in the quiet conference room, processing the morning's victories. Preston defeated board vote 1, Catherine apologizing. After 3 months of fighting, they'd finally reached something that felt like resolution. 8 months passed before Thatcher planned the proposal. 8 months of letting the dust settle, of Sloane rebuilding her relationship with Catherine through careful increments of their own relationship finally being allowed to exist without constant scrutiny. They moved in together into a new place that was neither his apartment nor her condo, but something they chose jointly. Barrett graduated from MIT and took a job at a startup in Cambridge, dating Clara seriously enough to bring her to family dinners. Catherine attended therapy religiously and slowly transformed from controlling to supportive. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was real, visible in the way she asked about Sloane's life instead of dictating it. Thatcher met with her monthly for coffee, both of them navigating the awkward terrain of building a relationship from scratch. On a Friday evening in August, Thatcher texted Sloane from work. "Meet me at Eddie's, 7 p.m. I have something to tell you." He'd spent the past 2 weeks planning with Barrett's help and, surprisingly, with Catherine's input. The diner looked different when he arrived early to set up. String lights hung from the ceiling, simple but transformative. Photos lined one wall, moments from their 3 years together that Barrett had collected. The owner had closed for a private event, something that had required significant persuasion and a generous payment. Barrett, Walter, Catherine, and a dozen Apex employees sat scattered in booths, all of them part of the plan. When Sloane walked in at 7 exactly, her face went through confusion to understanding to something that looked like joy mixed with terror. Thatcher stood in the center of the diner, holding a small box, his heart hammering. "3 years ago, you asked me to help you escape bad dates. I spent 2.5 years creating fake emergencies because I was in love with you and too scared to say it." His voice stayed steady despite nerves. "I'm 52 years old. I've been fired, widowed, spent years thinking my best days were finished. Then I met you and learned that age doesn't limit you, fear does, and choosing love is the bravest thing a person can do." He dropped to one knee, the position making his joints protest, but his resolve absolute. The ring box opened to show a simple platinum band engraved with "Never Too Late." "Sloane Whitfield, I know we've fought for this relationship every day since we made it public. I know we've faced board scrutiny and family drama and public opinion. But I also know that every fight was worth it because you make me better at everything I do. Will you marry me?" Sloane was crying and laughing simultaneously as she dropped to her knees in front of him, so they were eye level. "You're an idiot for thinking there was any other answer. Is that a yes?" "Yes, obviously yes." She pulled him into a kiss that was witnessed by everyone in the diner but felt completely private. Barrett's voice came from behind them. "About time. I've been waiting months for this." The celebration lasted hours. Stories got shared about fake emergencies and board battles and gradually falling in love while trying to maintain professional distance. Catherine gave a short speech about learning to accept her daughter's choices. Walter talked about second chances and authentic leadership. Through it all, Thatcher and Sloane sat in their usual booth holding hands, both still slightly stunned that they'd actually made it here. Around midnight, after most people had left, Barrett came over with Clara. "Dad, Clara and I have news. We're engaged too." The announcement made Thatcher stand and pull his son into a fierce hug. "Congratulations, both of you. We figured if you two could fight through board battles and family drama to be together, we could handle our startup stress." Barrett grinned. "Also, I wanted to beat you to the wedding so I could give an embarrassing best man speech at yours." After they left, Sloane looked at Thatcher with an expression that held exhaustion and joy in equal measure. "We're getting married. We're getting married." He pulled her closer. "After everything we've been through, that feels almost anticlimactic." "Nothing about marrying you could be anticlimactic." She held up her hand, watching the ring catch light. "Never too late. I love that." Barrett helped choose it. Seemed appropriate given everything. They stayed at Eddie's until the owner gently suggested they should probably head home, walking to their car through August warmth hand in hand. Thatcher felt something settle in his chest that felt like peace. The wedding happened 6 months later in February at a Boston Harbor hotel with 80 guests from both their worlds. Small ceremony, simple vows, nothing fancy but everything meaningful. Barrett stood as best man wearing a suit that made him look startlingly adult. Catherine walked Sloane down the aisle crying openly. Walter officiated after getting ordained online specifically for the occasion. Thatcher's vows were simple. Sloane, 3 years ago I thought my life was winding down. You taught me it was just beginning. I promised to show up every day, to choose you every day, to build this life with you one decision at a time. Sloane's response matched his honesty. Thatcher, you taught me that vulnerability is strength and authenticity is leadership. I promised to let you rescue me when I need it and to rescue you back. I promised to choose us over comfort every single time. The kiss after Walter pronounced them married lasted long enough that Barrett stage whispered, "There are witnesses, you two." The reception filled with laughter and dancing and speeches that made everyone cry. Margaret Fairchild toasted, "I voted against you initially. I was wrong. You taught me that authentic leadership sometimes means making choices that make others uncomfortable." To Thatcher and Sloane, may you always choose brave over easy. Catherine's speech carried vulnerability she'd never shown publicly. I tried to control my daughter's life because I was afraid she'd make my mistakes. But Sloane taught me the only real mistake is not choosing better. Thatcher, thank you for loving her with courage I couldn't find 40 years ago. Barrett's speech made everyone laugh and cry simultaneously. Dad spent 4 years after Mom died just surviving. Then he met Sloane and started living again. Mom made him promise before she died to really live, not just exist. Today he kept that promise. To Dad and Sloane, thank you for showing me that it's never too late to choose courage. As evening turned to night, Thatcher and Sloane slipped away to a balcony overlooking Boston Harbor. Still in wedding clothes, glasses of champagne in hand, the city glowing around them. "We did it," Sloane's voice held wonder. "After board battles and family drama and public scrutiny, we actually made it to married." "We did." Thatcher pulled her close. "And now we get to just live. No more proving ourselves, no more fighting for legitimacy. Just building our life together." "What do you want that life to look like?" "This. You, me, Barrett, and Clara, your mother, gradually becoming someone we actually want around. Work that matters and love that's real and the freedom to be exactly who we are." Sloane rested her head against his shoulder. "That sounds perfect." They stayed on the balcony until Cole drove them back inside to their reception, to their family and friends, to the life they'd fought so hard to protect. Later that night in their hotel room, Sloane asked, "Do you ever regret it? Everything we went through to be together?" "Never. Not once." Thatcher's certainty was absolute. "I'd rather have 1 year of truth with you than a lifetime of pretending with anyone else." "That's good, very good." She smiled against his shoulder. "Write that down. I'm living it instead." 5 years later, they returned to Eddie's diner for their anniversary. The owner had framed some of the photos from the proposal night, turning their story into diner lore. They sat in their usual booth with coffee that was still terrible and conversation that had only gotten better with time. 5 years. Sloane held up her hand, showing the ring that still caught light the same way. "Never too late still applies." "It'll always apply." Thatcher took her hand. "You know what I learned through all of this, age doesn't limit you. Fear does, and we chose courage over comfort every single time." "We did. We really did." She leaned across to kiss him, not caring about the other diner patrons or what anyone thought. After 5 years, the freedom of that still felt revolutionary. They'd proven that love could withstand scrutiny, that authentic leadership created authentic culture, that choosing truth over appearances was always worth the cost. Thatcher's career had flourished in ways he'd stopped believing possible at 47. Sloane's company had grown to $3 billion in valuation while maintaining the employee satisfaction that had become their signature. Barrett and Clara had gotten married and started their own family. Catherine had become a genuine support instead of an obstacle. The waitress who'd served them for 8 years now came by to refill their coffee. You two are good for business. Every couple wants the booth where the proposal happened. Should we charge royalties? Sloane's tone was mock serious. Nah, just keep coming back. Reminds people that good stories exist. After she left, Thatcher looked at his wife and felt gratitude for every hard moment it had taken to build this life. I spent 52 years learning who I was. Took falling in love to realize I was just getting started. That's very poetic for a man who claims to hate flowery language. I'm allowed one poetic moment per anniversary. Sloane laughed and raised her coffee cup in toast. To living it, to choosing brave, to proving that courage matters more than comfort. They drank terrible coffee in a diner that smelled like grease and possibility. Two people who'd risked everything safe for something true and found that the risk was always worth it. The story that had started with fake emergencies and hidden feelings had become something lasting, something real, something that proved love and professional excellence weren't mutually exclusive, but mutually reinforcing. Thatcher looked at Sloane and saw his future reflected back. Not perfect, but honest, not easy, but worth every moment. They'd chosen authenticity over appearances and built something that would outlast any board review or family drama or public scrutiny. It was never too late to choose courage. It was never too late to choose love. It was never too late to choose the life that made you feel most alive regardless of what anyone else thought about it. And they'd chosen. Every single day for 5 years and counting, they'd chosen each other and chosen brave and chosen true. That was the real victory, not winning board votes or gaining family approval, but having the courage to live authentically and the commitment to keep choosing that authenticity every day. Outside Eddie's diner, Boston moved through its rhythms of work and life and endless human stories. Inside, two people who'd fought for the right to love each other sat in comfortable sunts, grateful for every ordinary moment they'd earned through extraordinary courage.